Hey everybody, and welcome back to another segment of Talking with NuclearGoth. And joining me today is
Seabear!
And this week the two of us will be covering death in narrative-heavy video games. And I think Seabear has an amusing allusion to share relating to story-driven deaths.
Yes, I do.
In many stories, death is a tragic and dramatic incident. A life is taken away and affects the ones around them heavily, and if the story is well executed, can either bring the viewer, reader, or player of the tale to a heart-wrenchingly emotional feeling, or one of total rage, and not necessarily for all the right reasons.
Take me, for instance. When I decided to sit down and play through Final Fantasy VII, I thought Eris was the next best thing to come about since sliced bread. She was the most awesome character I had seen at the time. I mean, she was girly, she had a pretty pink dress, long hair, and she loved flowers. But she wasn't afraid to get in the battlefield and rough up some monsters. Unlike Tifa, who was like the tomboy of the group, or Yuffie, who, when you first meet her, puts you at a point of no going back because she stole every single bit of materia you owned. Despite all that, though, Tifa and Yuffie are characters I love too, but Eris was my favorite out of the three. So early on in the game, I worked with Eris to make her one of the most powerful characters I had. Come near the end of the game, she runs off, ends up being shish kebabbed on Sephiroth's sword, and being laid to rest at the bottom of a pool. So after that happened, I shrieked like a banshee at my screen and threw my controller on the floor and rage quit the game.
And while the game's story did its part right in making Eris a likable character, killing her off would have been quite a dramatic twist. Many a manly tear fell at this scene for the loss of a beloved friend's life, and at the same time comes the realization that you may or may not have invested heavily into said character's armor and weapon. Armor and weapons that you don't get back to pawn, and the only way to avoid losing these goods would be to dequip your character before the scripted event goes by, thus removing you from the immersive story altogether. And really, that's kind of a shame.
Not to mention, she dies about the same time you get her legendary weapon, so you don't even get to have that much fun with it.
And it isn't just something that plagues JRPGs. Some action-oriented games require you to lose a battle for the story to continue, and no matter how good you are at surviving, the game was simply made so that your opponent was, flat out, impossible to defeat. Back on losing items like before, if you didn't know you were supposed to lose, you could end up spending some valuable healing items, ammunition, or what have you on an unkillable enemy. And again, to save your precious items, it would require a reset of the battle, once again taking you out of the plot, even temporarily. These kinds of fights aren't always bad when you're supposed to lose, but it should be done very early on in the game when you're given a standard loadout of equipment you probably have no sentiment for. That way, you're not really losing anything, or even building a power struggle of a relationship with the boss that beat you, like Gary Oak in Pokemon, or Vile from Mega Man X.
However, it's a real pain when your character dies during a cutscene after battle, like Levitz from Legend of Dragoon. Keeping it short, King gets kidnapped. You go to get King. You battle boss. After a long and rough battle, you beat the boss. You think you're going to save the king and skip merrily out of there, but no. Here comes an after-battle cutscene where Levitz gets stabbed in the heart. This was another time when my favorite character dies in a game that sent me into a fit of rage. But this time not enough to rage quit. The only difference in LOD is they replace the characters they take away. The king ends up joining your party, inherits Levitt's levels, equipment, D-levels, and additions. But you have to relearn those additions all over again because King Albert has to be a princess and be all fancy.
And that's a good fix to the Eris dilemma. We're calling it that from now on.
No, that is not a good fix. A good fix is to stop killing my favorite characters.
And that about wraps up on this week's topic. There's seriously so much to write about when it comes to death in video games. I don't think you could really summarize it in 30 minutes, let alone all the time we used, and together. As usual, thanks so much for tuning in to this week's Talking with NuclearGoth.
And Seabear.
And we'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye!
I am Seabear. It is time to enforce my authority.